Hi everybody, it's Randy Baker from Composition and Visual Design. Just wanted to go through some camera reports for you. I know a lot of you have been commenting about the camera reports, and I didn't cover it that much in the Monday a live class, so I just wanted to go through and really talk a little bit about the camera reports, show you how to do them, where to find all the information, and exactly what we're looking for out of these. These are very important documents, and they're part of something that a workflow, production workflow that you guys all need to get into the habit of doing. And if you're really good at this, being a cinematographer or a director of photography or just a camera person, you really need to get in the habit of doing camera reports. It's a kind of a standard thing that we do, and we'll explain why. And basically what the camera reports are the written logs of all the technical elements of the camera settings that you'll be using for a shoot. These usually go into something called a production Bible that you'll learn about a little bit later on in some of the classes coming up here. Basically a Bible that has all the information, releases, your storyboards, your shot list, everything that, all the written information about a shoot is contained in one big report called the production Bible. So, you use camera reports for a couple different reasons. Number one is the analysis. And so part of the process of becoming a camera person and a visual storyteller or a filmmaker is that you really need to go back and look at your work and analyze what you've done and what worked and what didn't work. Especially while you're learning how to operate the camera, this is an important thing for you to know how to do. And it also helps you down the road. I keep camera logs. I actually have, I do most of it on my phone now, but I have reams and reams of these cinematographers' camera logs. And I used to use them all the time, and I'd write stuff down in them constantly. Anytime I was doing a shoot, I would write down all my main settings, and I also take photos of the viewfinder and photos of the set and stuff, which you'll learn about in week 4. But here's how we would use that. Now, I go back, and we'll talk about this in a minute, doing pickups, but I shoot a lot of sunrises and sunsets, and I remember the first couple times going out and shooting a sunset, I'm like, well, how the heck do I know what to set my iris for? It's pitch black out now, but the sun's going to come up. It's going to be extremely bright. So do I need, and the first time I did it, I didn't set ND in. The second time I had the wrong ND in. So I basically went out one morning and did camera tests for sunrises, where I figured out what the ND filters were that I needed to use in, and then where my iris should roughly be to get the best looking sunrise without blowing out the sun or without it being too dark. Wrote all that down into my little camera logs and camera reports. So the next time I went out to shoot, I went back and referred back to that, and it told me exactly, just refresh my memory on what I needed to do in terms of ND and aperture for that. So those are one of the big reasons to use this, is to go back through and do self-analysis and to use this as a reference tool when you go back out and shoot things that are similar to what you've already shot. The other thing is reshoots, and I've done reshoots on shows up to a year later, and I've talked to people who've done them up to a couple years later. It's not uncommon. And every television show I do, we go back down and do reshoots. We'll pick up a scene or something might not have worked, so we'll have to go in and actually just pick up a couple shots from within a scene. So if you have accurate camera reports and you have a photo of your setup, and you can grab a screenshot of the actual video itself, you probably have a pretty good success rate of going back through and recreating those shots. If you don't, you're just guessing and probably not going to have a really good chance of matching the shots that you need, especially if it's just 1 or 2 shots within a scene. You will be doing reshoots, trust me, on this. Just in a couple months here, when you hit fundamentals of production, you will probably be going out and reshooting shots for your shorts. So just be aware of that. So you need to get in the habit of doing camera reports. Every time you go out and shoot, you should do camera reports. Now, I do a lot of it in apps right now, but for the first couple months while you're shooting, you should really concentrate on trying to write them out so you have them available and they go into your production Bibles. It becomes really important once you have to go back out and reshoot and you have no idea what you're shooting, and you come back in and try to re-edit that stuff and it doesn't work and you have to go back out and reshoot again. you'll understand the importance of why we do this. Now, the third reason is really for me and for the instructor's use. And the camera reports are really one of the primary ways, one of the only primary ways that I have to tell how well you are understanding the technical aspects of what we're teaching here and what you're learning here. And that's really important. This class is all about teaching you some of the basics of the technical side of production, along with the camera and, of course, composition and visual design. But you got to learn this stuff now, and you got to take the time to learn it now. It's not something that you can just breeze over and go, well, I read it and that's okay. You have to know this stuff. It's really that simple. And I've said this before. You won't get through this class if you don't know how to focus and expose and white balance this camera. It's just not going to happen. Because it's that important. Otherwise, you're going to struggle through the rest of your time here, and we really don't want that. And really, it's just a matter of spending an hour or two a day. Spend an hour on exposure one day. Spend an hour on white balance one day. Spend an hour learning how to do selective focus one day. Spend an hour playing around with shutter speeds, and that's what these are all about. These assignments are all about. They're called camera tests. And for every time we go out and start a new show or a new film with a new camera and a new set of lenses and stuff, we spend a day or two actually just going out and shooting camera tests, which you're doing for white balance, you're doing for shutter speed, you're doing for depth of field, just to see where your equipment's going to work the best and how everything works. So for you, there's an added additional thing where it's teaching you how to do this. So when you do these camera reports, I'm looking for a couple different things. First of all, that you know how to write these correctly, and it's called industry standard nomenclature. And there are very specific ways we write these settings, and that's because each of these settings can usually be talked about in a couple different ways. For example, we changed the focus from meters, which is a European standard metric system, to feet, which is the American standard. And so things like that you have to be aware of. Same thing with shutter speed. You can talk about that in terms of seconds, which we do in electronic digital cinematography cameras, or degrees, which is a holdover from the old mechanical shutters of the film cameras. So you have to write these a specific way. Even small things like instead of writing a small f / for your f-stop, you write just a f, even a capital F with a / means totally different things to different people. So you have to understand how to write these correctly. And again, if you look at the top of the camera reports, everything in red at the top there you need to have in your settings when you put them into the log. So it also allows me, and here's the thing about these. You have to do these while you're recording them. And you have to sit down, print out this camera report, sit in the comfort of your own home with a camera in front of it, and just shoot something and then try to log those settings. It's a little more difficult than you think, especially because you have situations like the focus only stays up in the screen for 3 seconds, or the white balance for A or B only stays up in the screen for 3 seconds when you're white balancing. So you have to be aware of that, and you have to be able to write that stuff down and know where it's at. So that's what I'm going to teach you. The big thing is, if you make up numbers, I'm not able to give you the correct remediation that you need. Remediation is me explaining to you what you did wrong and how to correct it so that you can get better at it. And I try to do that almost immediately so that by the time you go out and shoot the next time, you know what you did wrong and how to correct that. And that's the whole process here. I don't care if you make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. We expect you to make mistakes. You're not experts at this, and the amount of information that we're throwing at you, some of it's going to stick and some of it isn't. My job is to figure out what's not sticking and then try to help you figure out a way to make that stick in your brain so that you know it. Because this is all core foundational stuff that you need to know. So if you just make up numbers and try to put them in there, a couple things happen. First of all, you're not smart enough yet to really do that, so I will be able to tell almost instantly. I've had people write all kinds of bizarre numbers in there that the camera doesn't even do. I've had people, I shouldn't see all your apertures at f4, for example. I shouldn't see all your focus exactly the same thing. You got to know how to white balance and follow that workflow of white balancing where you do A first under your key light, B under a secondary light source, and then dial in your preset and dial that in until it's close, and then pick the one that's Correct. That is designed to teach you how to white balance this camera, and also to use both custom and manual white balance A and B and preset, and also to teach you how to see the differences between a couple hundred degrees Kelvin at a time, which is what you need to do, and you'll be able to see that very clearly once you start training your eyes how to do this. So make sure you fill these out right. I tend to grade a little bit more severely once I figure out that you just made up numbers. You won't be too happy with this, and again, starting in weeks 2 and 3, everything you get wrong on these camera reports is off by a point up to 15 points. So if you just forget to put the K behind the Kelvin degree in your white balance, and you've got 9 shots there, that's 9 points, that a whole grade point that you lost just because of that. So make sure you fill these out. Now, this particular shot, and there's one thing missing from this, the PP2 that's down here for your picture profile. This particular shot is what your viewfinder looks like in your camera. And this came from this document. And if you haven't read this document, first of all, shame on you, because this is one of the most important documents you need to understand to be able to do these camera reports. This is the FS5 shot log guide that was in the assignment overview. And in this, I go through the... that's not it, that's your assignment. In this particular one, I go through the viewfinder, I tell you what all the screen indicators are, I show you an example of the shot logs, how they should be filled out properly, and then I go through how to write these right. Again, like I was talked about, industry standard nomenclature, you have to know how each of these is done. Everything in red is how they should be written. You need to do both Z numbers and millimeters when you do these shot logs. It's a point off if you don't do those. So you got to learn how to make that connection between the two. You got to have ISO in front of your ISO number and the Kelvin degree behind your Kelvin degree number. And then I go through each one and I explain what it is, f-stops, your aperture, what it is, when to use it, where you find it, and on some of them I'll give you a range. On other ones, like focus distance, I will actually tell you if there are any menu settings that need to be changed before you use these. And so I go through each of the numbers that you need to write down in the camera reports, tell you where they are, how to find them, what the menu, and I give you infographics along the way to help you understand that. Talk about Z numbers, I give you the chart. Now this is the chart you need to know so that you can begin to make that correlation between Z numbers and millimeters. Again, Z numbers are Sony's proprietary focal length system that is only used on Sony cameras and Sony lenses. Once you get away from those Sony lenses on Sony cameras, 99.9% of the rest of the world talks about focal length in terms of millimeter. So I really want you to concentrate on the millimeter part of it, even more so than Z numbers. And I would be happy if you put the millimeters in and not even the Z numbers. But you need to know that these are shot at a very specific focal length range, and you'll learn about why here down the road. And there's a small range for both, the Z numbers and the millimeters. It is the same thing, just you need to know these. But this is the normal settings that are shot at. They're shot at those settings for a specific reason. For example, normally a medium wide shot would be shot at 35 millimeter, a medium shot would be shot at 50, a close up would be shot at 85. So you got to understand that relationship, and I need to see that in these shot logs. I talk about focal lengths and shot types, and I go through each of the 7 different shot types that you need to know and talk about the focal lengths and why we shoot them at this. Really important stuff to know. If you want to be a cinematographer and you don't know this stuff, you're not going to get very far. So you really need to understand these concepts that I talk about. Very simple, but you need to understand it. I talk about ISO, what it is, how to shoot at the base ISO, what are the base ISO is for the all 9 of the picture profiles that you have on here. I show you the ISO range that you have. This is what you can do. We'll have the camera set up for low, medium, and high on the ISO switch at 800, 1600, and 2500. That's 0, 1 stop, and 2 stops more sensitivity that you dial in. Talk about the ND filters and when to use those. Just be careful. You don't want to dial in ND and then crank up your ISO. It's self-defeating. So you don't, for example, don't want to do a quarter ND and then dial up your ISO to 2500. So a quarter ND takes away 2 stops of light. A ISO 2500 adds 2 stops of light, so they just cancel each other out at the cost of the quality of your image. So anytime you crank up your ISO beyond the base ISO, it changes. And then there's a whole thing in here about how to do white balance and what we're looking for, how to do A and B, a little bit of information about color temperature, the 3 numbers I told you that you have to commit to memory. You have to memorize these 3 numbers and what they're for. And then I give you some common white balance temperatures. And then I talk a little bit about the guide frame. So make sure you go through this document, really important. So let me go through this and show you what you're going to need. But let me just jump ahead real fast here, and I'll show you, go down one more. Here's your shot log. Here's what you need. And so this is for week 1, and this is fast, slow, deep, and then extra shots. Shoot extra shots. Take an hour and learn how to do time-lapse with this camera, going to S and Q and turning it to 1 frame a second and shooting time-lapse. So when you're out there shooting these 30 to 40 seconds, I would set my shot up if it was something with the sky in it or something moving in it. I would set it up on time-lapse and just record, 20 minutes of it. And you get 6 to 7 seconds of time-lapse out of that at 1 frame a second. At 60th of a second shutter speed is what you want to be at. And so you can still go back in and grab an individual frame without any problem, but at least you also not only have the still image, but you have a little time lapse of the thing that you shot that you could use in your demo reels or your resume or online or social media. So you always have to be thinking about these in terms of digital assets. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to put the description of the shot in there, and this should be very basic, fast shutter speed shot of the bike, but I need to know, so it needs to say fast shutter speed shot of spinning top, or a spinning coin, or faucet, or whatever you're going to shoot. It needs to go in there. So it needs to be a description, and this description needs to match what I see underneath the photo in the assignment template when you dump your photos in there. Your f-stop, and this has to be written as a small f/4. Your range on this camera is f4 to f22. Now, if you use an iPhone or you use a DSLR, you have to find out what the focal length is. You just can't put nothing in here. So you can go online and find out whatever your cell phone is. There's all kinds of resources out there to tell you what the focal length is on that phone that you're using. If you're using a DSLR or another camera, that should automatically tell you on the lens or in the camera what the focal length is. So just because you're using a cell phone or a DSLR camera doesn't mean you still have to put these in. And you got to let me know that that's what you're using. In the shot description, you got to tell me, I'm shooting this with an iPhone, blah, 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 or a Galaxy, blah, blah, blah. Or same thing, I've got a Nikon D7100 with a 24 to 70 2.8 lens on it. That's what I need to know when you do this. Now, focus is simply the distance from the focal plane of the camera to the object that you're shooting. Now, the focal plane of the camera is right behind the lens, and if you look on the right side of your camera, on the upper top, there's a little silver spigot there that is a tape measure hook that you would put a tape measure on and run out to the talent's eyes and measure the distance. But right below that little hook is a little circle with a line through it, which is kind of the international symbol for a camera sensor. That's where it's located at, and you measure from that point out. So that's what this is, focus. So you zoom into your object, you adjust your focus ring till it looks in focus, and then you look in your viewfinder in the lower left hand corner here and figure out where the right here, 4.6 feet, you'll see this little hand come up, see where it says focus. But keep in mind, that number only appears as you adjust the focus ring, and then it disappears 3 seconds after you stop adjusting that focus ring. So you got to be able to see what this is. Now, to see that number again, you got to readjust the focus. So just be aware of that. In terms of your shutter speed, this is going to be set for 1/48th of a second, except for these 2 shots. This is going to be 1/1200th. This is going to be 1/6. The rest of the time in this class is going to be set for 1/48. Now we should set our shutter speed for 1/48 because we're shooting 24 frames a second, and the general rule is that shutter speed is twice the frame rate you're shooting to emulate the motion blur that the human eye sees. So 1/48 of a second is what we're going to be shooting in this class because we're shooting at 24 frames a second. The focal length, you need to write this in Z numbers and you need to write this in millimeters. So I need to add the millimeters in there. That's probably my fault. One of the things I need to go back in there. So it would be 18 millimeters, for example. And you would need to write the millimeters would go in there. So it would look like that. So I need to see both Z numbers and millimeters. Put that in there. And then filtration. It's either clear, quarter ND, a 16th ND, or a 64th ND. Now, again, your f-stops, your shutter speed, your ND, and your ISO, you need to be thinking about these things in terms of full stops of aperture. So, 4, 5, 6, 8, 11, 16, 22 is your 5 full stops for f-stop. Every time your shutter speed doubles, you add one more stop. Every time the ND filter is a quarter is 2 stops, a 16th is 4 stops, a 64th is 6 stops. Now you have variable ND, electronic variable ND on this camera. Don't use that because in this class I want you to use presets at a quarter, a 16th, and a 64, so you know what those numbers relate to. So that will give you a good base when you go back through and get into the electronic variable ND of kind of getting a good ballpark of understanding how many stops of neutral density filters are dialed in and how many stops of exposure that takes away. So it's important that you know that. So keep it to a quarter, a 16th, and a 64th. 2 stops, 4 stops, 6 stops. Every time you double your ISO from your base ISO, you're making your sensor one more light stop sensitive to the light. So 800 is 0 if you think about it that way, and I really should change this to 800 here. And then 1600 is 1 stop. 2400 is 2 stops, but the camera doesn't do 2400 ISO, only does 2500, so that's slightly more than 2 stops. And then this is Kelvin degrees, and you need to do A first. So you zoom in on a white card under your key main light source. Make sure you're exposed properly, hit the WB set button, and put this Kelvin degree number there. You then, if you're pointing this way at your key light, you have them take the white card and turn it away from the key light. You zoom in on that. Excuse me, set your exposure, and then you flip the switch to B and hit the WB set button, and then write that number down. And then you set up your shot. And make sure it's focused and exposed properly, and then you flip the switch to preset, hit the WB set button on the front of the camera, and then dial that preset Kelvin degree number in up and down using those 3 numbers I told you to remember to get you in the ballpark. 3200 if you're shooting indoors with your light kit, 5600 if you're outdoors shooting on a blue sky day, 6500 if you're outdoors shooting on a cloudy sky day. That gets you in the ballpark. Then you can go up and down 100 degrees Kelvin at a time by dialing that set select dial, your multifunction toggle switch on the right handle, until the image looks good to you. And once it looks good to you, press that set select switch in or the multifunction toggle switch in, and the white box disappears, and you've selected that preset number, which you then write down here. Then you simply switch back and forth between preset A and B, figure out which one looks the best to you, and these should only be a couple hundred degrees Kelvin off, different from each other. They may be the same. They may be exactly the same. You may have A at 5600 and preset at 5600, and that looks best to you. And then when you switch back and forth between those two, you will still even be able to see a difference between those two numbers because of the way the camera sets white balance manually versus custom. So just be aware of that. But there should be only a couple hundred degrees Kelvin here. If I see this at 32 and your preset at 6500, that's an issue. That tells me that you don't understand how to do that. So you got to understand how to do this workflow. It teaches you how to do both custom A and B white balance and manual preset white balance, and then switching back and forth really allows you to begin to understand how to tell the difference between 100 degrees Kelvin at a time on your white balance. Now, you have to bold or highlight the one you use. If you don't bold or highlight the one that you use, I have no idea how to tell which one you did, and so it defeats the whole purpose of me being able to give you feedback, and you will lose 1 point for each one you did that on. So you could foreseeably lose up to a grade point by doing that on the assignments coming up where you're shooting multiple photos. So just be aware of that. So that's how you fill that out. And we'll go through this. Now, I want to go back through with you, and I want to walk you through where all this stuff is on the viewfinder. So let's start with your focal length first. The first number is your focal length, and that's up here. That is where you see this. So here's your focal length, Z99. Now, if you see a little bar there, you haven't changed your menu settings correctly, so you need to make sure you have a bar there. You need to make sure you're an XAVC 1080 24p 50 megabits per second. Okay, so that's your focal length. Then the next one up is your focus, and that's this number right here, 6.4 feet. Now, you'll see the little hand there. If you go all the way to 1.5 feet, you'll see a little man there. If you go all the way to your end of your focal, beyond 450 feet, it turns into infinity, a little infinity sign. You'll see a little mountain there. So this is it. Again, this only stays on the screen, comes up on the screen as soon as you start adjusting your focus. Only stays up on the screen for 3 seconds after you let go of that focus ring. So just be aware of that. That's your focus number. And then the next thing up is your aperture, actually, your aperture is the first one up. So this is the first one, your aperture, f-stop number, f22. Now you can see it's a capital F here. Don't pay attention to that. It should be a small f / when you write these down. Here's focus. And then your next thing up is your focal length, Z99. That's where that's at. And then you jump right into your shutter speed, which is right here, 1/48th of a second. And then your ISO, which is ISO 3200. You should not be seeing ISO 3200. I got to go back through and retake this. That you should not go over 2500 in this class. It's really important. And then your ND filter is right here. Now you won't see your ND filter if you don't if it's on clear. You won't see anything here. There's nothing here. It just say nothing. It should say a quarter, a 16th, and a 64. Anything else, and you got it set for the wrong setting. And then, of course, this is your white balance over here. Now, this will say 3200 or a Kelvin degree number if you're in presets. If you're in A or B, there'll be an A or B there until you hit the WB set button, and then the A or B will change into a Kelvin degree number, but again, only for 3 seconds for A and B. Now, if you're in direct menu and you happen to hit the white balance button, you may also see a little a sun or a light bulb or something that says ATW. Get out of that. You don't want to be in that. It's outdoor, indoor, and then ATW stands for auto tracing white balance. That just means you're in auto as well. So you want to get out of that. So again, if you look at this, this is what we're writing down on here. F-stop number, F22, F to F4. Focus, it'll be 1.5 feet all the way up to infinity. Shutter speed, usually 1/48th, except for these two, it'll be 1/1200 and 1/6. Focal length, Z00 to Z99 in 18 millimeters to 105 millimeters. You got to do both Z numbers and millimeters. ND filter, either clear, quarter, 16th, or 64th. ISO 800. All the way up to 2500. So you could have ISO 800, ISO 1000, ISO 1250, ISO 1600, ISO 2000, or ISO 2500. That's the limit for this. And then your white balance, is usually going to be between about 3000 degrees Kelvin and about 7500 degrees Kelvin. That's the range. White balance usually goes from about 1000 degrees all the way up to 10,000 degrees. You need to be within those ranges. 3200 for tungsten, 5600 for blue sky, 6500 and above for partly cloudy sky. If you're up in the 9000s or something like that, or in the 1500s or 1700, you probably have white balance wrong, and that probably is a result of you not exposing it correctly. So make sure you're exposing correctly. So let's just go through this real fast, and I'll talk you through some of this. Again, please make sure you read the Sony FS5 shot log guide that I went through with you just a minute ago. But here's some tips and tricks that you should do. Now, you need to print this out and practice this. Print this camera report out and sit down at your kitchen table with the camera in front of you and practice writing this stuff out so that when you get out in the field, you go, oh, I don't know where my focus is. How do I get my focus up? Oh, I'm out here. I have no way of finding out. I'm just going to shoot and I'll make it up. That's not how this works. Same thing with A and B. So you got to know how to do this. Now, if you don't write these down, one of the tips I'm going to tell you about is that you can actually record the audio as because you're going to be recording 30 to 40 seconds of these each of the video, or you should be locking the camera down and recording 30 to 40 seconds of each one. You can record the audio of what the settings are. So once you hit the record button, again, you need to make sure your shotgun mic is on there and it's set up and that you've tested this before you do it. Because I won't accept an excuse where I thought I had it hooked up when I went out there and recorded all my settings into my microphone, and when I got back there was no audio. That you'll still get points deducted for that. That's not an excuse, because I'm telling you to practice this beforehand and make sure that it works before you go out in the field and shoot. So after you hit record, you just go through and say, okay, my aperture is this, and my focus, you'll have to adjust your focus to see what that is this. You have to pay attention to your, of course, you'll be able to see what your aperture is and what your focal length is and what your ISO is set for, what your shutter and is set for, and your ND filters. But your focus and your white balance, especially if you're in AB, you won't be able to tell that. Now, if you're in preset, you'll be able to see that on there. But you'll have to adjust that beforehand and then remember those numbers and say it into the microphone. That way, when you get back and you play that back, you can fill out your shot logs there. It's a little more tedious to do it that way, believe it or not. Now, some people have said, well, I take photos of my viewfinder just to use my cell phone and take a photo of that. That's good, but what happens is you got to set your camera up, to not blow out the white letters in the black viewfinder, which is a common mistake. Number two, you can't see what your focus is, and you can't see what your AB white balance is. So that doesn't work. So don't take photos and think that's going to replace writing down camera logs. You either have to record the information or you have to write it down. But either way, you have to transcribe it into the camera reports. Like I said, this first week, you guys are learning how to do this. I'm a little more lenient on this. But by the second and third weeks, I get much more, strict about this. So if you don't know how to write these by the second week, I'm telling you, you're not going to be happy with your grade. I'll take up to 15 points off just because of your camera reports, because that's how important they are. So make sure, again, my big tip is print these out beforehand and practice this in the comfort of your own home before you do that. Okay, so let me show you kind of what this looks like. And let's see if I can get, let me go to pages and see if I have example. Here's an example. So here's what your first week's assignment looked like. So for example, I'm going to go in and let me open this up real fast here. And I'm going to show you how to import some photos into here. Let's see, desktop, and we'll talk about what I'm going to do here. So the first thing I'm going to do is my fast shutter speed shot. Let me find this fast shutter speed shot. Okay, here's my fast shutter speed shot. And so I shot these water balloons bursting. Actually, everything I'm going to show you is student examples. Water balloons, balloons. 1/1200th of a second. Now you can say anything you want. This just has to match down there. And I was outside and I shot this. And I wanted kind of a medium depth of field, so I shot this, or they shot it at f8, and they were about 6 feet away from the thing, and they wrote all these things down. They shot this at 1/1200th of a second because this was the high fast shutter speed. And they had the focal length at Z75, which was about 80 millimeters. And they had no filtration in, no ND, so this was clear because they were shooting at such a high shutter speed that it took up 4 more stops of light than normal, and they were shooting at ISO 800, because they were outside, and their preset white balance was well, they white balanced first under things, and this was 5,800 degrees Kelvin, and then they changed it in the shade, and the shade actually went down to 5,200 degrees Kelvin, and then they did a preset white balance, and they dialed this in to 5,600 degrees Kelvin, and it looked the best, and they ended up using A, so they bolded A, so they just went up here, and they went to format, and they went to text, and bold. Okay, so they bolded A. So that's what it looked like. And then for the slow shutter speed shot, they did, let's see, where's their slow shutter speed shot? Here we go. They did a fan, and they did globe, spinning globe. And they shot this at a f5.6, and they were about 4 feet away, and they shot this at 1/6 of a second shutter, and they were on a Z80, or about a 85 millimeter on this, and they had no ND. Actually, they had ND1 dialed in, which was a quarter ND, and they shot this at ISO 800. And for indoors, they did the preset on A, or they did A white balance, and this came out to 3,600 degrees Kelvin because they had a little bit of daylight coming in, and they went over to another part of the, moved the card away from the key light that they had coming in, and it came out a little bit more daylight, so that was like 3,800 degrees Kelvin. And then when they went in and they set up their preset white balance, they dialed it into 3,400 degrees Kelvin, and that preset actually looked the best, and that's what they ended up using, so they bolded that. And then for the depth of field shot, for the deep depth of field shot, they shot a bunch of lenses. Well, actually, this, and they were going to use this, and it was ultra prime lens set. And this is actually an example I'm going to show you. Ultra prime lens set, and they shot this at a f22, and they were 4 feet away from the camera at 1/48 of a second shutter, and they were at a Z65, or about a 70 millimeter, and they had no ND in, so they were clear. And they shot this at ISO 800 because they wanted to get this as clean as possible. And A white balance under the key light was 3,200 degrees. They flipped it over under the shade, flipped it away from the key light and got 3,400 degrees. And when they went back in and they checked this, they set the preset, and their preset looked exactly the same at 3,200, looked good to them. But when they went back and checked it, they actually found that the A looked slightly warmer than what the 3,200 in preset looked, so they chose that particular one. Now, for the shallow depth of field one, they shot some clothespins on a line. So they did the clothespins, and they shot this at an f4, wide open, and they were about 5.2 feet away, and they shot this at 1/48. And they were about 85 millimeter, or Z85, or about 90 millimeter on this. And they had a quarter ND, or actually they had a 16th ND dialed in, which is 4 stops. And they had their ISO at 800. And for their preset, they did a 6,000 for A. They white balanced under the main sunlight source there. It was a kind of overcast day, slightly overcast. And then they went into the shade, and they actually got a little bit lower in the shade at 5,800 degrees Kelvin. That was the white balance for kind of the shade part of this. And then they set their preset white balance to 56 because they wanted to see what that looked like. And actually 56 gave them a little bit bluer of a look and they liked that, so they chose 5600 degrees Kelvin as the look for that. So that's what the camera reports look like, and that's how they filled them out as they were shooting them. Now, for each of these things, what they did was they came in and put these in. So the first thing they did was the water balloon. So here's what this looks like. So if you go to your Finder and you find the file, all you need to do is drag and drop that entire file on top of this, and it goes right in. Now if you go down here and click on the bottom of this, once you have it in, you double click on it, you have this little slider that you can obviously slide as much as you want. So that's what they did, and so done. And then it says insert fast shutter speed shot here, and I think in my thing I called this water balloons 1/1200. That's what I call this. Okay, for my slow shutter speed shot, that was the globe spinning, which was this one. And I just drag and drop that in there, and you can see it dropped right in there. And then I typed this in, and what did I call this? I called it the spinning globe. I'm just going to say slow shutter speed. I'm going to say what it is. Globe 1/6. A second. And then for my deep depth of field shot, this was the let's see, what did I use for my deep depth of field? I used the primes. So this was the ultra prime shot. So I'm going to put this in ultra prime, deep depth of field. And then for my shallow depth of field shot, we use the clothespins. So let me drag this in. Clothespins, just like that. Okay, and I type clothespins, shallow depth of field. Okay, so there you go. That's the entire thing done. So here's my shot logs for this. Very simple. I've got everything bolded. I've got everything written correctly. Here's my shots for these. Fast, slow shutter speed, deep depth of field, everything's in focus. Shallow depth of field, only the clothespins are in focus. So you can see how this works. And if you look at all these shots, they're framed right, they're exposed right, they're focused right. They all were shot at ISO 800. You know, there's no problems with them. So this is what we need to see from you guys. It's very simple. And then once you have this done, you simply go up here to Pages, and you go File, and you go Export to PDF, and it's going to ask you where, and you say good is fine. I would prefer you do best, actually, if you do this, because I want to see the quality of the images. If you do good, it's like pretty low. And then hit Save Next, and it will ask you where you want to save it to, and you just save it to wherever. I'm going to save it to my LMS here, week 1, and my assignment and examples, and go here, and I'm going to say week 1 export, and that exports that as a PDF, and there you go. So then that's the PDF that I put into the LMS that I do. So that's what you want to do. That's how you do this. So if you have any questions about these, don't hesitate to call me. Like I said, I'm a little bit more lenient on the first week for this type of stuff, but as we get into the second and third weeks, this becomes much more severe in my grading, and so you will not be happy if you don't know how to do this. But everything you need to know how to do is in this video and in that FS5 shot log guide, so just make sure you read that.